Hey everybody, I'm Bob Baker with Jazz Guitar today, and we're here with our feature and cover story for September 23. Sean McGowan. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Nice to see you, Bob. How are you doing?
It's hotter than hell in Atlanta right now. I can't complain, that's just the way it goes. So we're here to talk to you about you and your stuff and what's going on. So, in a word, what's going on with you, Sean?
Lots, all kinds of good stuff happening. Yeah, we could just kind of launch through the list. I mean, as you know, the Rocky Mountain Archtop Festival is coming right up in a few weeks here in Arvada. Very much looking forward to that. And our good friend Peter Henriksen is still working on the schedule last minute, but it promises to be amazing. He's got dozens of incredible guitar players coming from all over, and there's just going to be an amazing music. He basically has worked with the city of Arvada to work the festival in tandem with what would have been their Harvest Festival. So now Peter has three main stages in Old Town. So it's going to be we're basically taking over. It's going to be like a whole guitar weekend in Old Town, which will be amazing. He's got resident organ trios. He's got kind of a gypsy jazz stage going. He's going to have a blues stage, so it's going to be unprecedented in terms of its size. And then also leading up to that weekend, I'll be teaching with Frank Vignola at his Big Jersey Guitar Camp, the Rocky Mountain or the Mile High City, I think he calls it. Leading up to that weekend, and that's going to be a ton of fun. I'll be teaching along with Frank and Ken Smith and the usual suspects such as Jimmy Bruno, Bruce Foreman, Pasquale Grasso, and Jocelyn Gould will be there too. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll be doing that camp, and then the camp kind of dovetails right into the Archtop Festival starting on Thursday. So it's going to be an incredible weekend.
Have you ever done one of those camps? Is this your first one?
I did it last year with Frank.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And Gary Mazzaropi is there, great bass player, and we just have a lot of fun playing tunes. Last year, it was Ken and Frank and myself, along with Bruce and Jimmy, and just the stories and the music is just so much fun. And you can easily see why people continue to come year after year. I mean, I think almost after last week was finished, it sold out for this year. People had such a
right.
good time.
I was invited to the one in Savannah, and it was just a riot. So
Frank is great. I mean, he knows what he's doing, and also his partner in that endeavor, Joni Fort, is also incredible. So it's very organized. The vibe is really great. It's laid back. It's all about music and camaraderie. It's a lot of fun.
uh, there's not a better ambassador for jazz guitar than Frank Vignola.
Yeah, agreed.
You
He's
know,
amazing.
I,
So that's all coming up, and then actually just coming up right before that, I'm heading to the Fretboard Summit in Chicago, which is also going to be a lot of fun. A lot of guitar happenings there, and um, and then just finishing up my new CD release or recording. I just recorded, finished that album last week in the studio, and finished mastering it, which is always a trying endeavor. It's kind of like you run the gamut. At least I do. From this sounds pretty good to like, oh my gosh, this is like I'm losing my mind. This sounds terrible. And did it sound like this 20 minutes ago? And I don't even know what it sounds like anymore. To finally, hopefully, getting to the state where you're like, okay, it sounds pretty good again. I'm ready. I'm ready to release it.
well, I listened to three tracks of it, and I got to tell you, it sounds really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds really, really good. So I have a question for you on those tracks. And I hate to admit this, but I don't know the titles because I just went and listened, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I didn't put it in my head what they were. But um, are you are you doing that all on one guitar at one time, solo guitar, or is it overdubbed? And tell me what's going on there.
Yep, just one guitar at once. One of one of the things that I've really tried to cultivate over the last, I guess, almost 30 years now, is being able to play multiple parts and kind of create the illusion of more than one person playing, but not in kind of a magic trick, showstopper way. It just, for me, it was really out of a fascination initially listening to acoustic fingerstyle players, and then players such as Earl Klugh and Tuck Andrus and Lenny Breau, and certainly piano players where they have multiple parts happening and it's very musical. And so I think initially, because of Earl and Tuck in those days, really wanting to create the sense of full music happening, and like just like a whether it's a piano player approach or an a cappella group approach. So you have all of these parts, and for a while I was really obsessed with that, and trying to develop things in my playing, such as having the melody note sustain as a singer would, or a horn player. Like, imagine a trumpet's playing that melody, being able to sustain that while you're playing a bass line or chords or something else like that. So it's something I've worked pretty hard at for a number of years to get that. It's just with the goal of having it be musical, because you wouldn't want to, if the melody is long, then you want to be able to have the technique to support that long note. And yeah, so that's what I've kind of been working on for a long time now.
So, you're playing a 6-string guitar?
6 string, yep. I don't play 7 string. 6 string is all I can handle. And I think what's kind of cool about this record is it's all me. It's all solo guitar, just one take, in the studio, live in the studio. But they're on different guitars, so it's kind of fun for people that you and I are both guitar enthusiasts, and we're part of that community. And so I thought it might be fun to hear kind of the same player, solo guitar, same amps, same studio, same everything, but on different arch tops. So I'm fortunate to play 4 different arch tops, and it's kind of fun, I think, to hear the different tunes on the different guitars, just the subtle differences.
Well, I don't ask questions that I don't know the answer to. So I knew that you were playing it all by yourself, and I knew that it was, I understood that, but I wanted people to understand that. I think you do that I don't know anybody does it better. The separation, first of all, the separation of the low notes almost sounds like it doesn't almost, it sounds like there's 2 instruments going.
Mm.
It sounds like you've got the A and the E string have been separated out on separate pickups, going to a separate amplifier being EQ. I mean, it sounds completely separated, and you're really utilizing 3 voices. You're using bass, comp, and melody. A lot of guys use bass and melody, but you're actually getting a lot of comping in the middle of that too. It's stunning, how good what you've done is, and how difficult it is to pull off. And it's a lot of guys, I hear them play it and they're playing it well, but they can't make it sound like music.
Yeah, that's the key ingredient right there, is making it sound musical. And so for me, it's the sense of articulation, or the awareness of articulation. So, and classical players, my favorite classical guitarists have this, they have that down where, for example, maybe the bass line will be articulated in long, just every note is as full as possible, or it's short and having that variety. So it's not just kind of the
Right.
same monotone thing. Same thing with the melody. Some notes need to be long, some notes need to be short. Same thing with the chord comping, some are. So I think just changing up the articulation, and then another level would be trying to accent the melody so you have the melody louder than the other parts. And that's something that Earl Klugh and classical guitar players are incredibly
Right.
adept at doing, have worked hard at doing. It's not easy, because if you look at the mechanics of your right hand, that usually is going to be either your ring finger or your pinky on the right hand. And most players, even fingerstyle players, aren't necessarily accustomed to playing the melody with their pinky. But that's what you have to use when the other fingers are doing their thing. Also, what you described, and I appreciate that very much. We worked hard at getting a sound, but part of the secret ingredient in the studio was using a bass amp. So. We basically had 5 sources when we recorded this. We had 3 amps, an old Fender Deluxe, My old, it's an early 60s Brown Princeton amp that I love. I've had it since the early 90s and it just sounds so good. Has a Jupiter speaker in it. And then the third amp was a bass amp. And it was just amazing the difference between having a bass amp and not. And my last solo recording, My Fair Lady, we used an Ampeg Portaflex on it, which is, that's kind of a standard bass amp in all studios. It's a great tube amp. We didn't have one of those this time around, but the studio did have this old solid state, just a straight up Fender Bassman solid state amp. And it sounded great. So we mic'd each of those, so the three mics on those, not super close, because I don't like close mic, the sound of close mic, because your ear doesn't hear things right up next to the speaker anyway. So
it's we'll talk about that in a minute.
yeah, it doesn't sound natural. So we found the sweet spot for each of the amps. And then we had a room mic that we just set back to just kind of get some air and some atmosphere. And then the fifth source is a direct signal from a Grace Design preamp that I use live a lot too.
Well, you make a good point about we don't hear it from here. You hear it from 3 to 6 feet. If you're playing that intimately for your wife or whoever, and you want to be as intimately as you could, and given the way that you're performing it, how far away would their ears be from the guitar?
Exactly. Right. You're not going to be right on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I experimented with a couple of my earlier recordings, Indigo and Sphere, which is my Monk CD, where I was going for kind of an acoustic sound, and we had an AKG set up on the F hole, just off the F hole of the guitar, and that sounded pretty good too. It has a nice flavor to it, and I know that's what Joe Pass did. He had kind of one channel with the amp and one channel direct, and that's the classic virtuoso story, is that they recorded it and then they didn't have the amp channel, wasn't recording, so that's why it's all acoustic. And that's fine. It just, this, for My Fair Lady in this recording, I didn't want that because I didn't want to have to worry about artifacts like me breathing or me making some funny noise with my mouth. Or a lot of times I'll reach over with my right hand to get a chord voicing.
Right.
And so you can hear like my shirt sleeve go sliding across the top of the guitar, just things like that. So when you eliminate the mic, you eliminate at least that kind of stuff.
Well, and we don't. I know we're not here to discuss too much about recording, but you don't listen from an inch away from the guitar.
Right.
You got to. The guitar's got to breathe. The room's important. To the atmosphere is important. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And when you close mic, what do? You add reverb in the mix. Why do you add the reverb in the mix? Well, to put back the room, because you took the room out when you close mic. All that kind of stuff, which I know you're aware of.
It takes a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error, and sometimes, especially like in my case, a lot of making mistakes. Sometimes expensive mistakes. You put out a whole record, and you're like, "Geez, I wish I would have done that differently." And so that's one of those examples of things that people don't necessarily think of to practice. You're in the practice room, you're in the shed or whatever, and you tend to think, oh, I don't know. You don't tend to think of those things that will come up as potential issues when you're in the recording studio, like your time and your feel and the noise that you make while you're playing guitar.
Hearing yourself through headphones while you're playing.
Yeah.
I mean, that throws you for a loop. I mean, most people, it throws them for a loop. I mean, because it's not, I don't sound like that,
Right. Or just playing with a click. I mean, that's, that can be uncomfortable for a lot of people too. So,
did you play with a click?
On some of the tunes I did, actually. A couple I did. And for me, I go, so there's several tunes on the record that are in time, and some of them I had a click and some of them I didn't. And basically the reason I chose to use a click on some was just to really keep it in the pocket, because we all have a tendency to rush, and there were a couple of tunes where there's more of an ebb and flow, like part of it's rubato and then it goes into time and then it goes back to rubato. So obviously you can't have a click there. So I like the feel of playing in time without a click, but I've also learned to play with a click so that it can still hopefully sound swinging, even though I'm playing along with a click.
Well, you can always be in front of the click or behind the click,
Sure. And I'm sure that I am, but It's a good practice, you
I
know.
meant I meant purposely, Sean. I meant
Yeah,
purposely.
yeah, right, of course. Yeah. Um,
uh,
so yeah, we did use a click on a couple.
well, that's very cool. Well, I did notice that there is a huge um, the three tonalities, if you will, are evident in the mix. You know, people that mess with this stuff a lot. And I was in audio. I think I've told people that. Go, wait a minute, that's different. What's going on here? You know, what did he do? Well, how's that? How is he doing that? That's abnormal. You know, I will. And now I know. I mean, and the fact that you just sourced, you sent the source to three different amps. That's actually quite clever. As opposed to getting like a pickup that's got six outputs on it, for example.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I take that inspiration from a lot of my favorite guitarists that have made solo acoustic guitar recordings,
Mm-hmm.
such as Alex DeGrassi and Pat Metheny and Michael Hedges and Pierre Bensusson. They all, I mean, it sounds like acoustic guitar, but it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're sitting in the room with them and they're playing acoustic guitar. It's this huge, Olympian sound that in some cases, in some recordings, processed to an extent too. But the point is, I learned from players like those guys, they would just have all of these multiple sources, mix them all together, and then the result is a really incredible sounding recording. And that was also inspired by Tuck too. I mean, Tuck is he's an engineer. He built his own home studio and he's done all of his own recordings. And there's a lot of EQ and processing and to get that huge sound, which is what I'm after. I mean, I think there's also something very beautiful about just maybe putting a mic in a room and playing, and there's that kind of intimacy. But if I'm going to go, if I'm going to bother to put out a recording, I want it to sound, kind of cinematic, maybe is a good word for it.
Maybe someday you can introduce me to Tuck, because I would love to interview him.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he would love to do an interview
Yeah,
with you.
he's somebody that's been around like forever, and he and Patty are amazing. And that L5 is I mean, that's the whole vibe. He's just an amazing musician. So that would be very cool. So your approach to solo guitar, where you've been touching on it a little bit, but as opposed to like single note playing and all that. So you look at a tune like pick one of the tunes from the record. What do you do? What do you say? You're gonna. I would like to record. I don't know. Pick a song. Name a song. Any song.
Yeah, like Jingle Bells.
I like. I
like
like exactly.
I mean, I actually did record that. That came up recently because I was just talking about this with somebody else. I did record a Christmas album a few years ago.
Yeah.
That's all solo as well on acoustic flat top. But you're right. That's the question. What do you do if you have a song, especially if it's a song like Stella or All the Things You Are, which I did record in this last album.
Let's talk about All the Things You Are. That's a tune. Both Stella and All the Things You Are tunes that everybody's real familiar with. So
yeah, so I think that conceptually, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, why am I compelled to record this song, and what would I like to say? And that's the first thing that I think about, and it's definitely away from the guitar. I come up with a concept of there's a vibe there. There's a reason why there's an intention of why I want to do a particular song, and maybe that intention is accompanied by a very clear musical idea. That's always nice when that happens. Sometimes it's not accompanied by a clear idea. Like, well, I just kind of want to play this song. So depending on what kind of inspiration you go into it with. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. I just listened. I mean, I think it's always a great idea to just take a song, even something that we've all heard a million times, like All the Things You Are, and listen to lots of different versions of that. Lots of different vocal versions. I mean, if you listen to any of those versions of standards by, like recorded by Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, these lush orchestrations and incredible arrangers, you're going to get a lot of ideas for intros and harmony. Nat King Cole, same kind of thing, to even singers that might be more small groups, like well, Anita O'Day had huge, lush recordings, but also small group recordings. Sarah Vaughan's stuff with Mundell Lowe, maybe, Blossom Dearie. I love her stuff with like Barney or Kenny Burrell on guitar. So you can get a lot of ideas for just how people treat songs. And I get a lot of ideas from the way that singers record them, in addition to instrumentalists. Because then once you start listening to instrumental versions, then they'll take it out. Maybe they'll do it like in a different time signature, or they'll reharmonize it quite a bit. But I think it's always good to start with singers, and then that might give me an idea or not. So I'll just, that's one direction. If I already have a musical idea in place, it might be a guitaristic kind of idea. So maybe it's an alternate tuning. Like, I really want to do this tune. I don't do a lot of alternate tunings, but one tuning that I've used in the past is a low C and G for the bottom two strings. So the sixth string is down 2 whole steps to C, and the A string, the fifth string, is down a whole step to G, and then the rest are in standard. And that can kind of approximate the sound of a 7th string, or maybe you want to do a ballad that has a real big sound. Or maybe I'm approaching a song that has been recorded by a piano player where I need that range, and I've done that a couple of times. When I recorded My Fair Lady, some of those tunes I knew that I wanted to do it in a swing feel, but others I thought, well, there's a vibe that I want to capture. So like in the song Rain in Spain, I love that scene in the movie and in the show, and it's such a playful thing. And it's very show tuney, and the orchestra, and there's no way that I'm going to approximate that on the guitar. So at that point, I'll like do something completely different. So then I just ask myself, what if, like what? And so in that case, what if I did that melody and put it to a ska feel, And I used to play in a ska band, and so I was familiar with that feel and that kind of thing, and it ended up working. And so some tunes I'll say, well, maybe this is better swinging, maybe this is better as a straight eighths feel, maybe a samba, or maybe as a ballad, and I'll just kind of experiment with those tunes and see what comes out the best. In the case of All the Things You Are, that started for me, my arrangement on this record. I mean, it started with just kind of an exercise in reharmonization. That melody is so ubiquitous. Everybody knows it. As soon as you go da, 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 you're there, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an example of something where you can really take a lot of harmonic liberty to make it your own, so to speak. And so that's how that started. And then I just knew that I wanted to kind of blow on it a little bit. So once I get past through the head, I go into time and I just solo on it, just totally. That was a one take improvised tune, and then kind of like an ending in place. And then I might think to myself, well, I'd like to have something with harmonics, something kind of shimmering there. And so I'll write it out like an architect might, maybe like with a blueprint on a piece of paper. Again, I'm not even really with the guitar yet. Then I'll grab the guitar and I'll start bringing these ideas to fruition and trying them out. And that's kind of my own process.
No, that's very cool. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever change the key? Like everybody
sometimes,
knows.
But not usually. As a general rule, I'll play them in the key that I'm accustomed to hearing them in, which of course are mostly flat keys. But like for example, on the Monk album, I was very specific to keep all of the keys intact. So most of those tunes are in B flat, E flat, A flat.
Right.
I don't do that. I mean, I know some people did, and I know like Joe Pass loved playing in the key of G because he could get that open D string pedal on the 5. Like he would just kind of keep that D string going while he would do chords and stuff above it. But I like to stay true to the key just because it sounds right to me in those keys. And so sometimes I'll come up with a guitar solution to solve that key. So for example, when I did Trinkle Tinkle by Monk, that's in E flat, and I knew that I needed that low E string. So, but I didn't want to do the whole thing down, so I just tuned the E string down to E flat, kept the rest of the strings in standard, and just kind of figured it out. So all the chords were off by 1 fret on the low E string, but that's what I needed to get that low, root happening.
I've tried doing that. For those of you who haven't tried to do that, tuning just a half a step down. Now, D is common. Everybody does that. Yeah. But I've tried tuning the low E string to E flat for similar purposes. I can't do it. I stepping all over my self, trying that's tough to keep track of in your head, because you
Yeah, yeah. You have to just kind of like at that point you just turn to shapes and memorize the shapes and the fingerings and play
yeah,
a few
that's
times.
pretty tough.
But
Uh,
I enjoy solving those problems. Like it's really fun. Like, whether it's like using the two hands on the fretboard to get a cluster sound or up here to get a spread range sound. It's really enjoyable. It's fun for me to kind of solve those problems. And I think when you're arranging, whether it's for a group or solo guitar, it's just constantly solving problems or solving challenges.
well, I've noticed that in your technique, exactly what you're talking about. I mean, you use your right hand on the fretboard in unusual ways. It's not just a tapping thing or this, that, or the other thing. I mean, you'll actually pick a melody note and hit it with your pinky, on the high E string, for example. And I'm going,
Yeah.
okay, because it's not like you don't have other things going on at the same time,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
then on your bass line, you will add a little ornamentation to your bass line with your right hand as well, but not in a way that I've seen done before. It's really it's unique, and people probably should watch your YouTube videos to appreciate the techniques that you're using to achieve some of these things that you're hearing, because you're going, that doesn't sound like one guitar to me, and I know that's almost sounds trite to say it, but the reality is it just doesn't. And for those reasons, you're using
Yeah.
techniques that are not normal.
I had this, it was an Alan Holdsworth book that was really interesting and unique because it had all of the transcriptions of his rhythm playing, which to me is just as fascinating as his lead playing. And what I noticed throughout this book was that he would use his right hand to adorn a lot of chord voicings to get more like of a keyboard types of voicings with clusters and things. That's what he would do. And so I started experimenting. That's what the idea came from for me. And in terms of articulation, I never wanted to necessarily tap because I felt like it interrupted the sound of the passage. I wanted everything to sound like it was plucked, just like you were plucking a string and your left hand was
Right.
fretting the note. So the idea was to just simply use your right hand finger first or in first or middle, and then pluck it with your thumb or your pinky or your ring finger, almost like a harmonics technique. But instead of using your index finger to make the harmonic, you're actually fretting down. So I started developing that in a lot of different ways to create cluster voicings, like a piano voicing, to create spread voicings, so you could have a real high note while there's a low note, or even to, like you just mentioned, to keep a bass line going. And then years later, after experimenting with this technique, someone sent me an old article that was I think in Guitar Player magazine. It was a Tal Farlow lesson. And Tal was doing that technique like years earlier. He was experimenting with trying to get clusters with using his right hand to fret. So the idea is that you're just using this finger to fret, and the whole thing is being plucked with the thumb. So it doesn't. If you wouldn't know it was anything unorthodox unless you saw somebody do it. That's the goal. Is that you can't hear anything. It sounds like a guitar string being plucked.
Yeah, I there was a guy that I back in the 60s when I started doing this in front of people and all of that. There was a guy in our hometown that did all that crazy magic. And I went, what the hell?
Yeah.
So I got into it for a while, and I was never particularly good at it, and I didn't make an art form out of it or anything like that, but I could appreciate the technique and what's going on. So that that's very cool. Let me back up a minute, because you said something interesting. You are out and out rock and roller.
Oh yeah, I think everybody that grew up well. I mean, from the '60s through the '80s, started through playing guitar through rock. I mean, would you agree with that?
There's only a couple of people that did not. Pasquale Grasso was one.
There are people. John Story is another. I know he grew up listening to jazz, but but what's amazing is I've talked to so many people of a certain age demographic who literally started playing guitar because of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that to me is amazing. It's like people will talk about that. Mick Goodrick talked about that, and it was just like, it's like that one thing was so powerful that it went on to literally shape people's lives.
There is never since then been anything even remotely close to the impact that the Beatles had. You cannot overemphasize or even describe it. There's no, I mean, people talk about when Hendrix hit the scene and when Van Halen hit the scene. No, not, I mean, it's not even a pimple on an elephant's ass. When the
Yes.
Beatles, I actually got my inspiration from Ricky Nelson, back in the Ozzy and Harriet show. And I saw him, playing the guitar, and all those girls were looking at him. That's when I got interested. But when I said I got to do this was after the Beatles, and then Bob Dylan was a big, that was, I can make a D chord, and that's where. But absolutely, the people of that, there was a, we know where the term garage band comes from, because there was a band playing literally in every garage. I mean, you didn't know anybody back then that wasn't in a band.
Right,
I
right.
mean, the senior class might have been 300, 400 people. I would bet that more than half of them were playing in bands at the time.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I did. I was in a garage band, all through seventh and eighth grade and ninth grade, and just doing it and playing it and having fun. But I think one thing that was kind of cool, going back to growing up in the 70s and 80s, is that even radio at that time was much more diversified than it is now. I think with like the cable, the satellite and clear channel takeover and all that. Back in those days, you still actually had DJs programming music
Oh yeah.
independently. And so on the radio, like what I would listen to, because that's, what you did, or you had a cassette and you were trying to like, record your favorite songs they'd play on the radio. They would play like R&B, like Kool and the Gang and Stevie Wonder and, or all those great bands. And then they would play rock bands, AOR rock, I guess. And then they would play, like a blues, like Stevie Ray Vaughan would be like the next thing. And so, or like I first remember hearing Stevie Ray Vaughan on David Bowie's Let's Dance, I think it was. And so that all that to say that there are a lot of different influences. So I think as a young guitar player, you would be inclined to check this out. Like, oh, I need to check out Frank Zappa or King Crimson because I read about it in an interview, or now I need to check out this, blues. I need to check out Albert King because Steve Ray Vaughan and all of those things, and that's exactly what happened to me with jazz. Eventually, I think the players that were popular in the '80s were more on the fusion side, like Mike Stern and Schofield, and kind of getting interested in fusion at the time ultimately, got me into George Benson and Pat Martino, and then that leads to Wes and Kenny Burrell, and you kind of go through the jazz history backwards.
That sounds pretty familiar. That's very familiar. Yeah, it's pretty much, we went from Clapton and Hendrix, then McLaughlin came along, and that changed a lot of people's lives.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, that was a big deal. And then obviously Miola, D Miola with Return to Forever, and then I can't remember if I discovered Pat Martino after that or before, somewhere in there. But a guy that doesn't get his due is Larry Coryell. Was huge back then. He was a big.
Yeah, sure.
He's like kind of done. People don't talk about Larry Coryell, but he was a monster player back then. All right, so why is it? All right, I'm really off on a tangent now.
Okay.
All right. So why is it that so many guys that grew up playing then are still playing that? And then the guys like, that decided they wanted more, just started diving in deeper. And I mean, obviously in your True Fire classes, it's the deeper dive guys that sign up for your classes, for True Fire.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that is?
Boy, that's a really great question, and I think it's ultimately personal for everybody. Like some people, obviously, like I have friends my age that still play rock and stuck with that. So there's no telling. But for me, I can tell you, it really started when I was in high school. I grew up in Maine, and when I was in high school, I went to a music camp. It was a guitar camp, and it was down in Connecticut, and it had a lot of New York players in it. And so keep in mind, this is in the '80s, so this was well before the internet. I mean, really, the only exposure I had to live music was where I grew up with, not a lot of live music happening. So this was huge for me. I mean, all of a sudden, being with like-minded people my own age, and so I kind of went down to this guitar camp with the intention of studying with some rock guys, and unbeknownst to me at the time, that same week I was there, Michael Hedges and Leo Kottke were both there and played concerts every night and were there hanging around and teaching and stuff. So that all of a sudden I was like, whoa, that kind of really blew my mind. And then also there was a bunch of jazz players from New York. And so those two things really sparked something for me personally. Like it really sparked my love of acoustic music and acoustic fingerstyle guitar and all those playing that, that style, the Windham Hill style, that Leo Kottke 6 and 12 string guitar album, those kinds of things. And jazz, really, like hearing real New York City jazz guitar players for the first time when I was 15, was literally mind blowing. And so that to me, I kind of set me on my path of musical interest.
And you got a PhD.
Yeah, years later, I got a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts from USC. By that point in my life, I knew that with my career, I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach in higher ed, and to get a full time position at a university, I knew that I had to have a terminal degree, which is a doctorate now in music. So that's what I did.
I love the phrase terminal degree.
It sounds kind of morbid.
That's academia for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple more things we want to touch on. You got a new book you're working on called The Holistic Guitarist.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
I'm very excited about this. This has been a book concept on my mind and in my heart for 25 years easily. And I think the impetus behind it was um, back in the 90s, I started working with, as a solo guitarist, I started working with dancers and some visual artists, and but especially my work with dancers, it was really interesting to work on a musical project with non-musicians, actors. That there were people, kind of in my scene, um, and also at the same time, I was in an academic environment where a lot of people are getting injured. Cumulative trauma syndromes, tendinitis, carpal tunnel, upper thoracic outlet, back problem, all of those things. And no one ever talked about it. It was like the elephant in the room. And what I noticed was not only were students falling victim to these kinds of problems, but also the faculty. You'd walk around and you see people hurt. And there was such a stigma attached to it that people were afraid that they would lose gigs, and you just didn't talk about it. And so subsequently, now we know in hindsight, I'm part of a group called PAMA, which is Performing Arts Medicine Association, and it's a consortium mostly of doctors, MDs, who they're musicians, they play instruments and they want to help. And you go to conferences and the keynote speaker is like, the head physician for Cirque du Soleil, and so a lot of people aren't aware of like how taxing music and dance and acting and those things can be on the body. And so sadly, I've seen a lot of people over the years really suffer with all kinds of injuries. So the whole idea behind the book is really two or maybe threefold. It's a book, it's a compendium of stuff that I wish that I had access to as a resource. So part of the book is going to be dedicated to physical injury and how to prevent those things from happening. So how to practice in a way that really adopts a mindset and awareness of ergonomics, of good posture, just taking care of your body, avoiding repetitive, all of those things, just correct, effortless motion, basically. There's also going to be a few sections in the book about mental strategies for mental wellness. So just how to deal with performance anxiety, how to deal with being inspiring and getting past, creative blocks. And then finally, the third part of the book is going to be all about creative practice strategies, how to practice. So it's not only going to be drawn from my years of experience and learning and teaching and frustration and development, all those things, but I also have a lot of really great guest contributors. And for me, I'll often ask people when I meet somebody, especially if they've been doing it for a long time, like, how do you stay inspired. How do you stay injury or pain free? How do you, how do you practice and those kinds of things? So there's going to be a lot of great guest contributions about it. So the idea is that anybody, any style of music, any level of their development can just kind of open up this book and learn about various things. Hearing loss will be in there as well. That's under physical wellness.
Well, I think a book like that is long overdue. And I think that there's going to be people are going to say, well, I don't need that, screw it. And then there are going to be people that are going to say, wow, and it'll become something that every student has to have when they enter their freshman year of college or even high school. You got to have a copy of this book. This is the thing. So I think that it stands a chance of being that book, the one that you got to have, because
I think so. I hope so. I mean, it's so a lot of the material is developed from, or is culled from a class that I developed at CU Denver where I teach, and I developed a class called the Holistic Musician, and it's all of those things and more. This particular book is going to be published by String Letter, the publishers of Acoustic Guitar Magazine, and distributed by Hal Leonard. So it's guitar specific, but yeah, really the intention is all of this information that's out there, but it's never been in one place before.
right.
So you just go to this one book and have resources on how to practice, how to build self-awareness, how to avoid injury, what to do if you do get injured, and
Right.
resources there. Because there's actually going to be a lot of testimonials from musician friends who have had injuries and have overcome things like focal
Sure.
dystonia, back surgeries, come back, the neck problems, as well as mental strategies for success. And I'm fortunate to have a couple of really good MD friends also contributing and kind of serving as medical
Well, I was going to
reviewers.
say that you have that credibility as well, the medical community credibility to the things that you're telling people. I think it's fantastic. So that's going to be called The Holistic Guitarist, which is really, really cool. I have on my list here that you were so kind to send me anything else. But before we go there, we got a list from you. I asked you if you would give me a list of 10 influences and all that kind of thing. And you sent me, I thought you were gonna, all I wanted was a cookie, and you sent me a freaking 5-course meal, which is fantastic.
Bakery, yeah.
It's like, hey Matt, Sean, would you, just as a teaser, for your cover story. I love it. So so I'm just gonna ring some of these off real quick, and I just want like 2 or 3 words on each of them as to the quintessential why.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is, I wish I don't have a time code for this, so I can't write down the time code because we like to segment these things out. So we just have to, Joe, if you're listening, this is the one you got. All right. You ready?
So these are the top 10 recordings that influenced my solo guitar playing. So it's kind of a specific thing.
It's a very specific thing. Okay. And I just want you to give me that right off the top of your head. Why? Earl Klugh, solo guitar.
So clean, so elegant, and again, that fascination with multiple parts. When I first heard him, I didn't think it was possible. It's just like, there's no way that one person can do all this. And I just trusted that it was possible and listened to it over again. And I think once I realized it was possible in my mind, then it started becoming more possible in my playing.
Tuck and Patty, Tears of Joy.
That was such a great record, so positive, and the way that Tuck accompanied a vocalist was brand new for me at the time. I'd only seen guitar duos play like rubato, like Misty, super slow, things like that, and Tuck was just so grooving, so swinging, and so imaginative.
Tuck Andrus, reckless precision.
I think that stands as kind of a hallmark recording for so many people in terms of how much one guitar player can do, and all those different styles of music with his just incredible sound.
Joe Pass, Blue for Fred.
Yeah, Blues for Fred is his album dedicated to Fred Astaire, and I love the virtuoso recordings, of course, and I remember Charlie Parker, but that album to me, his playing is so fresh and so melodic and so swinging. To me, that's like the textbook album of solo guitar.
Alex DeGrassi, Deep at Night.
Again, going back to Tuck, who was also on Windham Hill at the time, this larger than life solo guitar sound that was in contrast to maybe, a folk acoustic player. It was just this incredibly cinematic produced guitar that was larger than life. And Alex's harmonic and compositional sensibilities were very influential on me. It was like jazz, but not changes, but he played the same things. Sounded like impressionistic music to me.
Very cool. Oscar Peterson, my favorite instrument.
Such a great album. So now we're into solo piano. So it's like listen to solo piano and realize all the things that you'll never be able to do as a solo guitarist, but nonetheless try to strive for some of that. And what I love about that album, and I mentioned in my little annotations there, is that the way that Oscar Peterson approaches ballads, and people don't usually talk about that. They just talk about his technique and his octaves and incredible chops, which is so great to listen to. But his ballad playing is unbelievable, and his sense of harmony and his use of the entire keyboard range was very inspiring.
I've interviewed a bunch of his guitarists, and that's really a trip to do that. So, Thelonious Monk, Thelonious alone in San Francisco.
Every time Monk plays solo, it's just so inspiring. I mean, you could take that first couple of chords. I mean, you could freeze some of his chord voicings and just do a whole study in that. It's so enriching to listen to his music. But I love the intimacy of that recording and his imagination and playfulness in his rhythm, and the way his left hand works, how he thinks with his left hand on the piano is so cool. I love that record.
Well, one of my favorites, Bill Evans, Alone Again.
Another, I mentioned in my notes there, it's fun to listen to how solo pianists or pianists address these challenges in a solo format. And Bill is very different. Like I mentioned, the Thelonious Monk will often, when they go into time, he'll often go into a stride feel. Oscar Peterson will walk this furious bass line, kind of like do a Ray Brown thing with his left hand. And Bill Evans is much more sparse. He'll just play these little cluster notes, guide tone voicings and solo over that. And that was really refreshing to hear. And of course, his sound and conception, hearing him solo is beautiful.
I love Bill Evans. Bobby McFerrin, the voice.
Yeah, so the same kind of like the opposite of the density, Oscar Peterson approach, but just austere one voice going. And listening to him kind of gave me permission to just play solo guitar with solo lines, which is how most people play, but not how I was thinking. I was thinking like, oh, I always have to have chords and bass line and melody at the same time. And you don't have to do that. Just sometimes a single note line can be really refreshing in that context.
Yeah, well, a lot of these guys are categories unto themselves. But anyway, take six.
Yeah, I heard that first album in high school, and it was revolutionary for me harmonically at the time. And I've since checked out like Gene Perling and a lot of other like various gospel groups, and of course Duke and Strayhorn and all those arrangements. But that was one of those recordings that really like shook me. That I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And I still listen to it all these decades later, and it still sounds so fresh, and I love it.
Well, this has been great. This has been really, really great. It's fun. One of my favorite things to do in the whole wide world is to have a good conversation with somebody that knows what the F they're talking about.
Well, I appreciate this conversation. It's mutual. I love talking about all things guitar and music with you.
Oh
And
man, no,
yeah,
I love it. And yeah, that was an F-bomb, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not above that, but it's really, really great. I wish you a whole lot of luck. I want to recap some of what we talked about a little bit. We talked about you've got the new solo record coming out.
Yep, that's called Portmanteau, and that'll be out on all streaming platforms. And I'm making a limited amount of CDs because I just have to,
Yeah.
artwork and stuff. But yeah, it'll be on all the streaming platforms probably by late September.
True Fire Guitar, you're all over that platform. I mean, you
Go
got
to truefire.com and you can just enter in my name to search, and there's a number of deep dive videos for walking bass and comping, playing with singers, solo guitar, improv, all that stuff.
you got the new book, Holistic Guitarist, which we just spoke about. And then the Rocky Mountain Archtop Festival. We can't talk enough about that, really. That's coming up in a couple of weeks, September 8th through the 10th, I believe it is.
That's right. And the website is archtopfestival.com if you want to check that out.
I got to tell you, guys and girls, that's the place to be in early September. It's
It's
just,
amazing. I mean, it's
it's,
what Peter's put together. Peter Hendrickson of Hendrickson Amplifiers. What he's put together is amazing. It's going to be an incredible show.
it's just, well, I mean, you people that attend just know it's a really cool event. They don't realize why it's a really cool event because all the back work. I mean, Peter's been working on this for a long time and really really hard. It's a great event. He does an amazing job. Everybody's there. I mean, you'll be watching somebody world class playing, standing next to a world class player, watching the world class. It's like whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Peter's put something together that is unprecedented, like nothing else in the world anywhere. I think at any time compares to that. I mean, you hear about these NAMM shows where there were these jam sessions, but
No, no.
those were few and far between. At Peter's Archtop Festival, it happens all day and all night long. And, Benedetto Guitars is going to have their own stage, and they have their whole concert thing just for the Benedetto players.
I,
And then all of these other luthiers there. I mean, there's just at any, drop of the needle, there's like five different world class, guitar players and educators giving workshops on different topics, people playing at various places all over town. I mean, it's just going to be amazing.
I went to every NAMM show from 1984 up until about 4 years ago.
Wow. You still have your hearing.
Every one of them. Yeah, I do. Actually, my hearing's quite good. Every NAMM show, I was in the industry. So that's a long story. I don't want to get into it now. And I can tell you that I never witnessed anything. I've seen, individual jams or the jam night or the guitar night, or there was a lot of cool things going on, but nothing compares to this event in terms of the concentration for this specific genre with the amount of cool people that are there. It is in my life, and I've been around a little while. It's unprecedented. It's amazing. So we're all looking forward to that. Sean McGowan, anything else?
That's it. I would just thank you for your time, and I really appreciate the conversation. It's always fun to talk with you. Thank you
It's
so much,
great.
man.
Well, this is going to be on the cover, and we're excited for it. And you're going to be walking into the Art Shop Festival with a cover,
Nice.
and with a new record, and a whole bunch of opportunities to perform in front of people. And I mean, it's good to be Sean McGowan right now. I'll tell you that. It's good to be Sean McGowan. God bless you, my friend. Thank you. See you soon in person. And thank you so much, Bob Baker, for Jazz Guitar Today with Sean McGowan. See you, Sean.
Thanks all. Thanks, Bob. Talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Cheers.